Hi, I'm Alex and I'm a magician, and as a magician I like to live by a number of important principles. This being the first and possibly most important one, being story. Story. First question, most important question, why do stories matter? Well, stories matter basically because we're human. I mean, presumably you're a human. I'm mostly human, and all the cats watching, sorry. But as humans, we communicate through stories. If you go down to your local pub or restaurant, or you go and sit in your local coffee house or a non-local coffee house, you will hear people, friends, family, work colleagues, whoever it is, mostly communicating through stories. Not every piece of communication is a story. Obviously, if you're trying to get across Excel spreadsheets, or if you're trying to get across sales figures, or if you're even just trying to sort of think about things in the future, that won't necessarily be a linear A, B, C, D, beginning, middle, end story, but gossip, jokes, things that happen to other people, people going on holiday, news, all of that stuff, the stuff that kind of makes us human, makes us feel fleshy and bold and normal and alive, and the stuff we bond with people over are stories. Go and listen. Maybe not turn this video off immediately because, hey, I need the views, but next time you're sitting around and you don't have anything to do, listen to people talking. Another key element is, as you can see, even just me sitting here, we're surrounded by other people telling us stories. Books, TV shows, films, infinite amount of them, especially now with Netflix and Amazon and Disney Plus. There'll be more stories in our life and more access to stories in our life than ever before. Everything on Twitter, everything on Facebook, everything on LinkedIn, everything on TikTok, whatever the hell TikTok is a story of some sort. It's what it means to be human. We think and we communicate and we see the world through stories. What is it that makes a good story? And possibly in conjunction with that, what actually is a story? There are almost infinite definitions of stories out there. Different dictionaries, different authors, different people, different internet columns, all sorts of stuff that look at story. For me, in the past, I've defined it as a series of events focusing around characters. That's kind of broad enough, but doesn't really say anything about it. The important point for me is that story hits three elements. 1. Change. 2. Transformation. And 3. Growth. You might be thinking that change, growth, and transformation are all sort of the same things, and you'd mostly be right. However, there's a big difference for me and in the way that I think about these things. There's always a tension between two elements in any story, in any good story. You have internal elements and external elements. The internal ones are obviously ones that are associated with the character, their own journey along the way of a story. The external things are what happens in the world, and this is where the difference between change, transformation, and growth happens. Change tends to be done with the external world. Something happens to the hero, the protagonist, the character, whoever it is the story is concerned with, and it changes the world. It changes either the entire planet, their whole reality, or it could just change an environment that they're familiar with. Transformation is much more a balance between the internal and the external. It is the journey that the hero or the character or whoever it is goes on. Think in Star Wars, for example, the easy option, the easy example of all this stuff. Luke starts out as an orphaned farm boy on a desert world, doesn't know anything, he has a calling towards great adventure, but is frustrated and stuck where he is. The transformation happens when he finds these droids and gets this call for a old man in the desert that no one's heard of for years. Then, in the second act, he gets brought into this crazy new amazing world of spaceships and the Force and space wizards and amazing weird things that start happening. His dreams come true, but only for a minute, until things go absolutely wrong. In the third act, he loses the mentor, but he gains confidence in himself, and he finds that he is no longer the same orphan boy as he was, but he is a realization of the hero incarnate. That journey from Tatooine to the end of destroying the Death Star, spoilers, sorry, is about transformation. Change happens at every stage of the journey, but the entire thing is about transformation. Finally, growth is about the internal change and transformation that happens to the character. If the hero or the subject of the story doesn't change, doesn't learn, doesn't grow, there's still a story there, but it's not going to be interesting or engaging or fascinating for your audience. And that's what we're about. We're about trying to tell a story that grabs people's attention, holds it there, and keeps your audience engaged and fascinated and bought in. Okay, you have this idea, this binding thing between change, transformation, and growth. Question is, how do you use that to tell a good story? Well, for me there's a couple of stages, and I break them down piece by piece. First piece is character first. You have to know and get to understand the hero of a story. Again, there's been pages and pages and reams and reams and reams of paper and inches of columns and gigabytes, terabytes of data associated with trying to dig into, well, what makes us like a hero. And like maybe isn't the right word. If you're curious about this, look at things like Deadpool, look at things like Han Solo. These are characters who, if you met face to face in a normal social situation, you wouldn't really like unless maybe you were a psychopath. But watching them on film, you do like them. You want to spend hours facing the massive cinema screen looking at their adventures, or maybe not with Solo, a Star Wars story. But you don't necessarily have to like a hero. You don't have to like a character in a story to want to know what happens to them. The key, I think, is empathy. You have to understand where they're coming from, what they've been through, what they want. That's the key to most stories. If you can find a connection, if you can find some emotional bond, some empathy with the main person at the heart of the story, you'll want to keep going with it. You'll want to see how it ends up, how it turns up, what happens to them. And because it's never that easy, it's not just the hero of the journey, of the story. There's always an antagonistic force, whether that's, again, an external element or an internal element. There is always something that stands in the hero's way. Things like Star Wars, things like comic book stories, things like Neil Gaiman's stuff, a lot of that is embodied in a character. You can't have Luke Skywalker without Darth Vader. But as a storyteller, as someone who's trying to communicate, you have to give these people depth, because that's just how life is. It would be amazing if the people we didn't like, the politicians, the leaders, the bullies, all these kinds of people were just one-dimensional, flat beings. But they're not. Every person is a hero in their story. Every bad guy is a hero in their story, and we need to know that. And that expands out to even the smallest detail. A person working at a reception desk, a person delivering a package, a person going about their day while something happens in the background. All these details, all these characters exhibit and live in a world that should be rich and full of detail. To really define a character, ask yourself 3 questions. Who are they? What do they do? Why does it matter? Secondly, conflict follows. There's no point telling a story if there's no point to the story. The whole idea behind telling a story is that you have something you want to say. Some meaning, some message, some metaphor, something that you want to get across. So, the best way to do that is to use the antagonistic force to prove your point. You have a protagonist, which is basically the hero, or someone that, again, the story focuses around, and you have the antagonistic force in there, the person who opposes everything the hero embodies. This is where conflict comes from, and conflict is at the heart of every story. I would love to be all hippy-divvy and lovey-dovey and be able to say, look, tell your stories, go out, be free, do whatever you want, make art, make amazing, enthusiastic, beautiful things, and you don't have to have conflict. But the unfortunate reality is we love conflict. Again, go read the newspaper, look online, look at any of the reality TV, any of the current dramas on TV, any of the soap operas, anything like that, and you will see conflict in every scene. There is always one character who wants one thing and another character who wants the opposite thing. And when they collide, that's when story happens. And lastly, structure finalizes. There are perhaps a billion videos on story structure. The most prominent and arguably the best, I get to that, is Joseph Campbell's Hero's Journey. His monomyth, his hero with 1,000 faces. It is by far the most popular and probably the most influential. However, we have here what I think is by far the best book on story structure and story in general. This is John Yorke's Into the Woods, and his structure, his 5-act model, is pretty much perfect. I wouldn't say it's definitive. There's no such thing as a definitive story structure. There's always variations, and there should always be variations. I really highly recommend you go get this book. It's probably available on Kindle or iBooks or whatever else, or getting the physical copy. Much better with the physical copy because you can make notes and highlight and do all sorts of stuff with it. I'm not going to go through it now, just because you can go and explore the ideas for yourself. However, using the story structure, if you Google John Yorke, if you Google the hero's journey, will help you break down all aspects of your communication. At what point do you want the audience to be? At what point do you want your hero to be? At what point do you want the villain to be? This is an amazing book on story. I'm not going to go into too much detail because honestly it's far better if you read it for yourself and you work your way through it. There are videos online talking about the structure of it. I link them down below in the description, as well as other things. There's a good number of videos on the hero's journey, and I'll link a couple of down there as well. Go pick it up. I promise you will not regret it. If I've done my job right, there will be a bunch of thoughts and ideas and things going around your head now. Just to clarify, I try and break down some different aspects and things for you to go away and do. 1. Look at your favourite stories. Do they deal with conflict? How do they deal with conflict? 2. Go and listen to people talk. Don't eavesdrop, that's weird and a bit creepy. But go and try and absorb how other people talk to each other. They won't be talking about facts, they won't be talking about events, they'll be talking in stories about characters, about feelings, about emotions, about what happened to real people. 3. Look at your favourite story. How is that structured? Does that follow the 5-act structure, a 3-act structure, a hero's journey structure? What happens in it? 4. Pick up on a key element that I've been dropping throughout this entire video, which is the why questions. Why do these things matter? Why do stories matter? Why does conflict matter? Why do characters matter? Because the key thing, as I said before, is that we want to communicate. We want to engage people with our ideas, with our messages, with our feelings, with our thoughts, with our experiences. So, why does any of that matter? Why should someone listen to you and to what you say? Hope you found this helpful. If you do, give it a like, consider subscribing, consider following, consider stalking me in real life, consider throwing money at me, consider hiring me to be your personal dancer, consider all sorts of things. But please, honestly, don't do any of those things. Just give it a like, give it a subscribe, and I'll do more of this stuff. Thanks.